a matchup.
And what a team, Mike. Metro PCS and the iPhone SE for $0 on a network that covers 99% of people in the U.S. Oh, impressive.
Play with the best. Switch to Metro PCS on an unlimited LTE plan and get a 32-gig iPhone SE for $0. Metro PCS. Coverage not available in some areas, plus sales tax. Claim based on talk and text. Not valid for active numbers currently on the T-Mobile network or active on Metro PCS in the past 90 days. See store for details and terms and conditions.
I feel like we're Wayne and Garth on the recreation of their public access set.
On Trial. Starring Mark Radulich. Also starring Sean Comer. Hope you're ready, Hollywood, because you're on trial.
All rise, court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Fudge presiding. This is On Trial, and I am your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich. And tonight I take the role of prosecutor as we end a week dedicated, it's really only 2 shows. It's just 2 shows out of 4. Well, we'll call it a week. A week dedicated to the Death Wish franchise. Tonight, we put Death Wish, the original 1974 feature film, on trial. And here to defend this orgy of violence captured on film, the one, the only, the twitchy, the gamin, he, Sean, you're not, Mr. Sean Comer. How do you do, sir?
Well, now that you just stole my shtick, you schmuck.
No, see, you
at least now I know you watch my stream.
No, I just know you stream on Twitch, so I called you Twitchy. Get it? And then you could have just barreled in there like that's right. I am Sean and you're not. You just reaffirm, sir. Reaffirm.
The way I always start my stream is good evening, my jet bears. I'm Sean. You're not. Welcome to another chapter of the Comer Codex.
Ah, okay. So what's fun about this show is the first time we are recording On Trial on Spreaker, on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network on Spreaker. And as I was explaining to Sean, I'll show you a little bit how the sausage is made. The way the Spreaker setup works is he can't hear the sound that I play and proceeded to talk over the intro music. That's fun.
Oh, shit. You didn't explain that part to me. Otherwise, I would have shut up.
I counted you down. You're like, this is like Wayne's World. And I don't know if you heard me banging my head into the desk. But
no, you didn't. No, you see, the only other time I have done this, no, there was no part where I had to wait through intro music. Let's see. When I first started podcasting occasionally with Jeremy Lambert, he would count in, wait a beat, and then go right into his intro. When I do podcasts with Stuart, I don't know if it's a thing that's on whatever audio suite it is he's recording and editing with, but there's like 3 knocks, like something on wood, and then Stuart goes right into it. I don't have an intro music that I have to sit there. You didn't tell me you were actually going to play the intro. I thought you were just going to tack it on at the start in post.
Nope. I don't do nothing in post. I post in post. That's what I do.
God damn it, Mark.
It wouldn't be a Radulich and Broadcasting it wouldn't be a Radulich and Broadcasting Network production without some sort of silly screw up. But at least it's not Blog Talk Radio. All right.
Yes.
So
fuck small favors.
Yes. So I did see the new Death Wish. I have watched the old Death Wish. We are going to prosecute and defend said Death Wish tonight. Let's get into it. Sean, what are your notes for this 1974 orgy of violence?
Well, Judgy Fudgy, This film, directed by Michael Winner and starring the late, great Charles Bronson, is based somewhat on a 1972 novel of the same name written by Brian Garfield. The thing about it is, on the one hand, the source material was a treatise against vigilantism. The film tends to kind of sort of embrace it in its own way. It very much stands by setting no limits, drawing no line when it comes to punishing criminals, and that's one of the reasons why it did so well at the box office. Made on a budget of $3 million, made $22 million, and it's still regarded today as a modern kind of hard-boiled classic of the early to mid-'70s. And that's because at the time, the United States was dealing with crime in major metropolitan areas across the country just going straight through the roof. It was getting out of hand. And keep in mind, this was also about 10 years before Bernie Goetz kind of became the face of very real-life vigilantism. It's also somewhat notable in that it features the early appearances of some eventually pretty well-traveled and well-known actors. Veteran character performer Robert Miano played a minor role as a mugger. John Hertzfeld played the mugger responsible who kind of eggs on our hero Paul Kersey by slicing his newspaper on the subway. Eventual Welcome Back Kotter star Lawrence Hilton Jacobs was uncredited, but he played one of the Central Park muggers that you see near the end of the story. Actress Helen Mirren has a rather minor role, and this was before she would eventually appear on Good Times and 227. If you ever watched Sesame Street, Maria is in this movie. Yeah, Sonia Manzano is uncredited as a supermarket checkout clerk. Christopher Guest plays a young police officer who comes across Kersey's firearm. And most notably, a youngish Jeff Goldblum plays one of the hoods who assaults Kersey's family early on, which of course is the act that eventually sends him just spiraling right on downward. Otherwise, we've got a phenomenally good soundtrack composed by Grammy Award-winning jazz artist Herbie Hancock, which was his third score, after also doing 1996's Blow Up and 1973's The Spook Who Sat by the Door. What else? It actually wasn't received that well when it first came out. In fact, the reviews ranged from mixed at best to out-and-out negative at worst. But it became the catalyst for what is now kind of an unsettlingly timely debate about how to deal with rampant crime. Yet at the same time, critics were really put off by how exploitative they found the chilling rape scene of Kersey's daughter, and then subsequently Kersey's own premeditated murders. However, they kind of had to concede that it was somewhat realistic. It wasn't at all implausible given the state of society. Despite the fact that many critics considered it an out-and-out threat to public decency because they felt that it encouraged antisocial behavior, which is a point of view that I don't know that I necessarily entirely agree with, but mostly. I think there are other ways to look at it, but we'll get to that in a bit. We always seem to come across Roger Ebert's reviews of just about any movie that we do. He didn't agree completely with its philosophy himself, much like me, but overall, he gave it a positive. As for the original novelist himself, he was really displeased with how inflammatory the final film was. He had absolutely no love lost whatsoever for what he considered pretty much pointless sequels. And I think that's a viewpoint most audiences would agree with. And the way they did out and out advocate for vigilantism. However, they did put the idea in his head to write a follow-up to Death Wish and its sequel called Death Sentence, which came out about a year after the film came out. And as for its iconic star itself, Charles Bronson was pleased with it. He saw it as a commentary on the violent state of humanity and as an indirect attack on violence, not a romanticization of it. Let's just go ahead and be obvious. It was nominated for AFI's 100 Years, 100 Thrills. Paul Kersey was nominated for AFI's 100 Years, 100 Heroes and Villains. And it's pretty much regarded as a modern classic, not just in its era, but overall. So much so that you can see and hear it referenced everywhere today, from The Simpsons, American Dad, and Spider-Man to the Opie and Anthony show, repeatedly using the clip of Jeff Goldblum yelling "Goddamn rich cunt," and works by a number of hip hop artists. Oh, and also it's referenced in both 2013's Payday 2 as one of the game's difficulty levels, and a whole separate mission on Hotline Miami 2 Wrong Number, which is simply called Death Wish. And that's your quick and dirty rundown of the cultural significance of one of my favoriteest movies ever.
Ooh, we get to poke holes in your sacred cow, your Zampats. That's going to be fun.
All right. Like I do, I'm defending this. I ain't poking holes in shit.
No, I get to poke. All right. So the plot's pretty simple. Sean actually covered a lot of the plot points in his notes. But essentially, we meet Paul Kersey and his wife. We get to spend some time with them before Jeff Goldblum leaves a trio of muggers into their apartment, proceeds to beat her to death, and rape his daughter. He is of the liberal bent, not a fan of guns, but after a trip to Tucson, Arizona, he is slowly but surely wooed in the ways of arming oneself and protecting oneself and their family with a gun. When he gets home, he actually finds a gun that was given to him by said Arizonian that was left in his luggage. So back in Manhattan, things only get worse for Paul. He finds out that the daughter is severely depressed, nay catatonic, from the trauma of the assault, and they have to commit her to a mental hospital. Paul starts walking around with the gun. He's mugged. He shoots the mugger and runs home to vomit. Again, he starts walking through the city, this time on the lookout for violent criminals, and he starts shooting them. And rinse, repeat, until he starts to catch the eyes and ears of the local New York City Police Department. And an investigation begins with this vigilante killer. He starts to earn some notoriety, which is embarrassing for the police department. And ultimately, at the end of the movie, while he never actually finds or shoots the initial muggers, he does run afoul of some other random ones and one gets a good shot in, and he ends up in the hospital where he is confronted by the lead detective, who basically says, look, we found your gun, and you've become somewhat of a folk hero and an embarrassment for this police precinct. How about this? You vow to leave New York quietly, and I'll go throw your gun in the river. Which he does. He moves to Chicago, unpunished for his sins, as it were. And at the very end of the movie, we have some hooligans in the, I believe it's O'Hare Airport, who are hooliganing about. And he makes a, I'm going to shoot you with my finger gesture. And that's how the movie ends. I'll say, sorry, it's Union Station in Chicago, not O'Hare Airport. Whatever. That's the quick and dirty on the plot synopsis. As you know, if you've been listening to the show lately, I don't want to spend a tremendous amount of time on this part. Sean actually brought up the central thesis of my argument against this movie in his notes. This was written at during the malaise of the 70s. This was how do I put this? This was a feature in which the writers consciously took the psychology of the time, the fear of our cities that were drowning in crime, and the continued fear, paranoia that things were only going to get worse. Remember, we're coming out of the tumultuous 60s. We're into the malaise of the 70s. We will start to move into the Jimmy Carter, high, not taxation, but inflation era. This is America kind of at its modern lowest, right? Right before the supposed boom years of the Reagan era. And if you're looking at, the middle class, there is a palpable fear. This movie spoke to that fear. It said, you know what? Sometimes a man has to just get a gun and shoot his way through the fear, through the nonsense. And that's what Death Wish is. Death Wish isn't so much a story as it is gonzo pornography. It has elements that typically prop up a good story. It has a character, possibly two. It actually tries to get you to get to know some of the quote-unquote characters, so that when you take them away violently off screen, it evokes a reaction out of the audience. It sure does try, at least. And I'll get to that in a minute. But ultimately, 90% of this movie is a guy with a gun shooting random bad guys. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Robert Winfrey and I on Damn You Hollywood debated the merits of the revenge feature with respect to Death Wish 2018. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. Go listen to that podcast when we're done here. But suffice to say, the revenge flick is a motif that has been done zillions of times, some better than others. There are ways to do it in which a revenge feature works well. And then there were some that are just badly done. And while I know that this is held in high esteem, especially for its time, and before maybe this sort of thing was as often done as it is now in feature films, and I know that there are people like some of our good friends of this network who laud the folk idealism of a guy, taking the law into his own hands and shooting his way through the muck and mire of a city gone rotten. I get all that. And to a degree, I don't have a problem with it. But this is about examining a feature and debating its merits. And the fact of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Death Wish is a poorly told story with almost no characters. I would put out there that Paul Kersey, the Charles Bronson character, is barely a character unto himself, but at least there's an attempt there. Everything else is video game bad guy. Even the wife, it didn't even need to have a name. She was just the wife. She was an object to be destroyed as an impetus to push him into the street to do his thing. And if you don't know what the term gonzo pornography is, see, like, there's some porn that has a story to it, kind of. You know, the pizza man shows up and he gives her the sausage, right? This tale as old as time. Gonzo pornography eliminates...
Wait. Are we going to be getting into dick swinging again?
No. That was a couple of shows ago.
All right, objection withdrawn.
Okay. There'll be no dick swinging in Death Wish, mind you. But Gonzo seeks to cut away the fact of a scene like that. There's just sex. It's just scene after scene after scene of sex. Well, instead of sex, let's do shooting. Scene after scene after scene of shooting that connects to nothing and is held by nothing but the flimsiest matter. Again, I don't want to do much of a comparison here, so I'm going to keep this a little vague, but go see the new Death Wish to kind of see where I'm coming from with this. Paul Kersey does not go into the street. He is not compelled to seek revenge on behalf of his destroyed wife and his abused child and mow his way through those that have wronged him because the system has failed. That's a story. Now, I could be accused, maybe even by the defense, of being married to what one would call conventional narrative, but there's a reason why it's called conventional narrative. It's because it's a strong narrative that works. There's no narrative here. Man goes into street, shoots barely connected things, and then after a certain amount of time, the ref goes, "We're done here," and the movie ends. That Death Wish could have been 8 hours long. It could have been 5 minutes long. It would have been the same movie, no matter what, because all it is Charles Bronson shooting nameless, faceless bad guys. Now, I will concede it's fun to see some of our fun actors show up in this thing as terrible muggers. The one of the African American actor that was on Welcome Back, Kotter, that was a fun one. Jeff Goldblum, obviously, that's the best. But that's it. Other than that, there was nothing for me to really tap into here. Now, the defense will say, but there is a story. There's the whole thing with him in the police department. Okay, so let's examine that, right? Again, he's not pursuing justice. He's reacting out of anger, and he's defending himself in positions he puts himself in. Okay, he's out walking the streets at night, and looking for trouble. So that's one thing. So then you have the police department, which this is probably the most interesting part of the film, actually, is the investigation into him and what he's doing. There's a choice narratively that could have been made that would have made this stronger, and that would have been to actually prosecute the guy and have the debate in the courtroom over whether or not what he was doing was just in a world with a system that was failing. But instead, he's not punished for murdering people. He's essentially held up as somewhat of a folk hero, but again, film, visual medium, they say it, but they don't really show it, that I recall. And if they did show it, it apparently didn't stick, so it wasn't done well enough. And then, like I said, they just, we'll make you a deal, we'll get out of the city and we'll throw the gun away. Which, okay, that's stupid, but they did it. And then you could have at least saved the film by saying, you know, by having that moment of self-reflection for Charles Bronson going, well, I went too far. I was a man pushed to the limits. I did a bad thing, but I will repent for my sins. Nope, he makes the gun shooty thing with his fingers at the end of the movie. So what have we learned here, children? Man goes into street, shoots a lot of guys, gets away with it scot-free. If I pitch that as a movie, I don't think anyone would make it. And I can see why the author of the original book was irritated by this film, because he's absolutely right. This celebrates vigilantism for no other reason than violence is good. This isn't a redemption by revenge tale where he goes after the people who wronged his family. This is gonzo violence pornography for the sake of gonzo violence pornography. Your witness, sir.
Jet bears of the jury. To understand one of the things that makes this movie so compelling even now, you have to think about not only the time, but some of the people behind it. This was not the days of Showtime's Dexter, when character had to be fully spelled out and elaborated on in on-the-nose monologues. A lot of times, movies of this era kind of said what it needed to say and then left you to sort out and think about it for yourself and come to your own conclusions. It expected people to be independently minded. That is what Death Wish does. It doesn't hammer you over the head with necessarily an anti-violence message. But what it does is it delivers that in another kind of way. And it does it in some extremely interesting ways. One of my favorite actors of that era, and in fact a contemporary of Charles Bronson's, was Lee Marvin. In one of his more famous interviews, I believe it was one that he conducted with Playboy, he discussed the violence that was inherent in so many of his roles. And he reasoned that the best possible way to keep people from wanting to emulate it is you take the violence and you make it so close to the brutal reality, so authentic, that no reasonable-minded average Joe would think about actually imitating it. The vast majority of people would take one look at it and say, nothing in me wants any part of that whatsoever. I believe that works, to be quite honest. And it's something that I like to believe Bronson himself believed in. Because you have to understand, he was, if we're to draw a comparison, he was nothing like the contemporary stars of today who come from polished, very soft, intellectual backgrounds. No, here was a guy who, after he graduated, who when he was 10 years old and his father died, he went to work first in the office of the coal mines near where he grew up, and then in the mines themselves, eventually earning $1 for each ton of coal that he mined. When he came of age, he enlisted in the Air Force in 1943, and serving in the 760th Flexible Gunnery Training Squadron. And then in 1945, he was a Boeing B-29 Super Fortress aerial gunner with the 61st Bombardment Squadron out of Guam within the 39th Bombardment Group. And in World War II, he conducted combat missions against Japan's home islands. 25 missions and received a Purple Heart for wounds received in battle. This was not a man who misunderstood the price of violence. And he's also a man who understood the toll that violence takes on an individual's mind. He portrayed it with subtlety. It wasn't a kind of manic overacting. He exuded a very kind of stoic masculinity about him. And such is the case here. You do see a sense of loss, a sense of detachment in those cold eyes after his wife is murdered and his daughter is robbed of her mind after a horrific rape. It's not an explosive rage though. He's a lost man. Is what he really is. And what this movie portrays is the idea that once you start killing, it's hard at first and it's jarring, but sometimes for some people, it ends up becoming too easy. And past a certain point, you don't want to stop. Compare that against, well, for example, compare that against a key moment in season 5 of Arrow. Mark, if you haven't watched it, you might want to mute this part because I'm about to spoil something.
No, I'm good. Go ahead.
In which Oliver Queen, under excruciating psychological and physical torture, finally just admits what he later acknowledges is the absolute truth, is that way back when, once he started killing, problem was he didn't want to stop. He wanted to keep going. He enjoyed it every time he killed a bad guy. And that frightened him. The problem is, the unsettling thing about this movie is, and again, I point out that it's subtle. You're left to come to this conclusion yourself, and that's what I enjoy so much about it, is the fact that depending on your mindset, there are some people who will watch this and who will actually be kind of fascinated by the fact, yeah, okay, he kind of got a symbolic, a Pyrrhic sort of revenge. But at the same time, wow, I'm kind of horrified that he doesn't want to stop, that he just wants to keep right on going. He apparently just wants to move to another city and just pick up right where he left off. Is this what taking a life can actually do to some people? Man, I want no part of that. They took the violence and they made it so brutal that a reasonable-minded average person would want absolutely nothing to do with it. But again, as the prosecution pointed out, this was something that was spawned by a transitional period in American history. The tumult of the 60s had given way to the malaise of the 70s. That's true. America was at its lowest. That's also true. It's not a story so much as gonzo porn. Yeah, no. No, we weren't beaten upside the head with raw emotion, with Marlon Brando screaming "Stella" at the top of his lungs. And yes, 90% of the action that takes place is a guy with a gun shooting random bad guys. But here's the thing about that. In a way, isn't that kind of saying something about Paul Kersey himself as well? By the end of the movie, isn't it saying that it started off as a crusade that was set alight by the death of his wife and the rape of his daughter? But now you almost kind of look into his eyes and you wonder, does he even care about why he started doing it in the first place? Is that even crossing his mind anymore? The lights are on, but is there still even anybody home up there? It isn't a poorly told story. It's a subtly told story that tells just enough to let you come to your own conclusions. It doesn't have to be 2.5 hours of everything being long and drawn out, because what it wants to focus on is it wants to focus not so much on the courtroom consequences, but it focuses strictly and narrowly on his personal descent and how this changes him in a very dark way. It shows more than it chooses to tell. It's a story that doesn't really need monologuing. It simply doesn't, because what you have is someone with Bronson's kind of quiet but very solid presence. So much so that he can convey plenty with body language, just with the way that he holds himself. You know, it isn't Daniel Day-Lewis, but there's a kind of brilliance in his own acting. And again, it's from somebody that had some experience with some of the most grisly first-hand violence the world has ever known. A man who went to World War II. So I'm sure he had a mind for the idea of, well, somebody's been through this and just taken a life for the first time. No, how they're thinking it happens isn't always quite how it works. Sometimes it's a little more subtle than that. It's a little more unassuming, a transformation that just kind of happens almost without the individual realizing it. So I think the key to this movie is, as much as you trust in the source material, you also have to trust in the man who was charged with portraying the evolution of this character and what he brought to it, and the idea that he was able to find a sort of kinsmanship with Paul Kersey through his own experiences, and by thinking about the world that he now lived in. Because really, he is what carries the movie with his performance. And so that, quite frankly, is all I need to say about why this should continue to be upheld as a modern classic. The floor is yours.
My only point that I want to put out there is, well, I think the defense puts forth a solid case, for subtlety in movies, and I am reminded of Robert and I constantly lamenting the fact that you can't make The Deer Hunter in 2018. No one will sit for it. Dog Day Afternoon, people would walk out. And while I am not holding up the argument that it's a boring movie, I was not bored, and I was not bored personally, and I don't think this is a movie that doesn't have its gripping scenes to keep people invested. But I will say this. As I was listening to the defense and he was talking about, the subtlety and the acting and everything, I just kept thinking, maybe my problem with this movie is in a vacuum, in the time that it came out, all of what was said is true, but I think, much like there's an argument that goes something like this, there'll never be another Beatles. Okay, well, the counter argument to that is there's better bands that have come along ever since the Beatles. The Beatles were a thing in a certain time, in a certain place, and they had a certain impact. But there's no way in God's green earth that's the best band in the history of modern rock music, or music in general. No way. There are better bands that have come along since. There are bands that did the exact same thing the Beatles did, and did it better. And that is how I want to conclude my prosecution of Death Wish. My best compliment towards Death Wish is it's a fine start for a revenge film, but there are those who have done it better, that gave more gravity to the character going through those issues, that gave more gravity to the argument being had. The argument was made more coherently and more cogently. And I think, again, if you want to sit down on a Sunday afternoon and watch a guy shoot up Manhattan, you wouldn't do worse by sitting down and watching Death Wish. But there are better, more intelligent movies dealing with the same subject to be had, and I would steer you towards them. The prosecution rests. All right, so let me tell you what I really thought of the movie. That's why I said, I really couldn't argue with a lot of what you were saying because I got all that. I think, and this is the argument Robert and I got into on Tuesday, which I don't want to rehash here, but I guess I thought he would be dealing directly with the tragedy that befell his family. I felt like this was too indirect. Like this was a guy lashing out. And I just wanted more. I felt like we would get glimpses of what they were trying to say, and a lot of what you were putting out there as, well, no, it's subtlety, and I wanted more of. I wanted more. I understand what they were going for, but it left me a little cold. Not to say that I wasn't entertained, because who isn't entertained by a guy shooting muggers, especially when the muggers are as fun as the ones in this film. And boy, were they ever! The muggers in this are great. They're the best part of the movie for me. It's just give me the money, baby. It's awesome. What a time the 70s were. God, I was born way too late. But Jeff Goldblum just chewing up scenery in that horrible scene, as jarring as it is, he's hilarious. He's so Jeff Goldblum-y, it's amazing. So cinematically, it's all very entertaining, but I think on a subject as serious as taking the law into your own hands, vigilantism, whether or not a man has the right to shoot another man under certain circumstances, I needed a little bit more. I needed a little bit more of the conversation. I needed a little more of the psychology of all of that to have affected our main character. You call it subtle. I called it barely affected. At least that's how it came across to me.
I could see that, but again, and this is something I've said on many podcasts before when we've talked about movies from around this era. There's something when it comes to the action genre that I will always believe was lost forever when the stars who were born in a time of when the draft was in effect, and a lot of young men did end up either enlisting or being drafted to go over and serve and do their duty to their country, when they were kind of aged out of those roles, because there's something extremely true about what Lee Marvin said, and that is that action back then wasn't nearly as flashy. It was gritty. It was bone crunching, and it was because it was made by people who understood it. It was made by people who had actually taken a punch, fired a gun, been shot, maybe shot somebody, something like that. And so it's not like you have to go and have Jeremy Renner and Matt Damon and whoever go and tag along with a veteran so they can learn what the mindset of a soldier. They didn't need to think about that. They knew. It wasn't a stretch. And with Bronson, there you've got a real hard scrabble blue collar guy. Like I said, had been making a living working for a coal mine since he was 10 years old. And that authenticity gave the movies something different. It's not like nowadays when you watch somebody, like for example, you watch Keanu Reeves in The Matrix, and you just make it look so cool and so visually stunning and so flashy that of course you get some people who might go out there and try to imitate it, or any other action movie. I mean, it's not something that thankfully has happened much. I think because of movies, but at the same time, it's also a connection to the realism of depicting violence that's gone, and that is probably not coming back, because if you were to boil it down to if you'll pardon the reference, the realest guys in the room nowadays who are truly most convincing in those kinds of roles, you get down to guys like Jason Statham, Sean Bean, Daniel Craig, Hugh Jackman, Dwayne Johnson. And really, if you wanted to boil it down, it's kind of like an interview I once heard about the glory days of professional wrestling, when Jake Roberts once said, look, if you were to take wrestling and boil it down to who were the real tough guys, the only guys you'd have left would be Jim Duggan and Haku. Nowadays, if you were to pare it down to only the guys where you go, no, it's not an act, this person probably really could seriously kick my or just about anybody else's ass, that's what makes this totally believable. Like I said, you at a certain point would get down to just the guys that I mentioned, and Hugh Jackman is such a nice guy. He's believable in physique and everything and physicality, but in terms of his demeanor, no. The guy is about as far removed from Wolverine as you're pretty much going to get. So for the real serious guys, you get down to guys like Vin Diesel. I would throw Vin Diesel in there as another one with the air of a very legit toughness about him. So they're okay. I could pare it down to probably Daniel Craig, Jason Statham, Vin Diesel, and Dwayne Johnson. Because you don't have guys like a Clint Eastwood, a Lee Marvin, a Charles Bronson, a Steve McQueen nowadays. Not even really a Bruce Lee. So that's, I mean, do you not think that's probably why Death Wish was a little bit different back then? Was just because it was a different breed of actor that you could slot into a role like that?
Yeah, I mean, it was funny. There were two movies that I was thinking about as you were talking. One was Commando. Now, I'm not saying Commando, is necessarily in the same genre as Death Wish. I mean, to a degree, it is. Essentially, he's, people have kidnapped his daughter, and he takes a machine gun into the woods and goes and gets her. But but that had all the subtlety of a brick to the face. But it was also more of an action adventure than it was a noir revenge tale.
Exactly.
But the other movie I was thinking about, because I kept this isn't my most eloquent argument tonight. I was somewhat struggling with words. But the movie that, when I say I wanted more, this might throw you for a loop, but the movie I was thinking about was Falling Down. Michael Douglas does a great job of conveying through the screen a man at the end of his rope. A man willing to abandon his middle class or upper middle class life to get a bazooka and start shooting it at people.
Yeah, but for one thing, that's two shades of a color on the same palette. But they're very disparate shades. It's like comparing hunter green to lime green.
Okay, but isn't comparing Falling? I mean, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're agreeing that Falling Down and Death Wish is a like-to-like comparison.
Well, sort of, kind of. I would say it's almost like comparing lemons to limes, or maybe no. It's more like comparing oranges to lemons, because you have two different depictions of the same kind of descent, but they end up falling onto opposite sides of that canyon. With Bronson, with Paul Kersey, it's a case wherein it isn't explosive. It is subtle. He just kind of gently slips in to that pursuit of vengeance. It's something that's quiet. It doesn't happen all in one spectacular flourish.
No, but I looked at Bronson's portrayal, and I just feel like he never really embraces the monster that he's become, or even recognizes he's become one. He vomits once.
But that's what I'm getting at. They're different kinds of monsters. They're different kinds. Bronson vomits once, but then he finds he wants to keep going because different personalities do snap in different ways. Sometimes it's someone who just starts a pattern like Kersey does, and it's a quiet kind of fall. But then you have somebody who really does just decide to completely lose it and just completely just go up in one enormous bonfire of rage at everything that they've been forced to endure, like Michael Douglas does. And I think there's validity in the plausibility of both.
It may be a matter. Let's call it here. It may be also a matter of personal taste. Mm-hmm. When I compare Bronson's monster that he becomes to Michael Douglas's monster in Falling Down,
which is also a good movie. I'm not knocking Falling Down. I love it.
Falling Down is probably in my top 50 by far. I love that movie, but I got a sense of the psychological snapping with Michael Douglas. And it's not like he's running around, screaming on screen, but like you do get a sense of crazy eyes in his performance. You do get a sense that this man has turned off all the lights in his mind, and is and something that was inside him that was deep and buried under layers and layers of humanity and society has all those layers have cracked away, and out comes this monster, and he's not strong enough to keep it in check. And he just lets it go.
But I think you just nailed what the difference is there between them, though. Mm-hmm. With Michael Douglas's character, it's something that was buried in him. With Kersey, he becomes something that it wasn't latent. It wasn't something that he had ever been curious about. It's in Michael Douglas's case, it was more of an awakening, of an unleashing. In Kersey's case, it was more of a sudden shift, an almost instantaneous personal metamorphosis.
Here, I'll give you a comparison.
But it's one that was just brought about by one decision, by one point when he could have gone one way and he could have gone the other. It's not like things had just been mounting necessarily for years on end, kind of like they apparently had been for Michael Douglas's character, and then all of a sudden they just exploded. It's more of a case of, he came to that point in the flow chart when he found the gun. He decided to go one way, and he had kind of no idea how that moment was going to rewrite him. What's your comparison?
I was going to say, and this tells you more about me than it does anything else. I think in the case of Michael Douglas versus Charles Bronson, Michael Douglas is the Hulk and Charles Bronson is Iron Man. One has a raging beast inside of him, and the other one put on a weapon and went into the streets to use that weapon. It's fine. I'm actually curious now about the rest of the sequels. I hear that they run the gamut of shit to okay, but there was one that a coworker of mine was telling about where at the end, it's very unsettling. I don't want to give it away if anyone hasn't seen it, but he was telling me about it, and I actually thought that was the end of this one. But there's one where, like I said, there's a very unsettling ending that I'm curious about. So I'll probably at some point, especially because they're like $5 on iTunes to buy them, I'll probably work my way through the series at some point.
That's about $6 too much.
Got a question for you. I know among you and Ronnie Adams just love when I schedule years ahead of time, but this is what you live for. That's why you keep doing shows with me.
Bring it, Sensei of scheduling.
Next year is John Wick 3. Okay. We don't do Long Road to Ruin anymore, but at some point I need a reason to watch the first two movies before I see that one. So either we need to put at least one of the John Wicks on trial, or maybe do a special, I don't know, either a special Long Road to Ruin and watch both of them, or just do one of them on trial, or do both, over the course of a few weeks.
You know what, Mark?
You want to do it?
You know something?
What's that mean, Gene?
Let me tell you something, Gene Mean. I've been giving this some thought lately. It's funny you bring up Long Road to Ruin. When we ended it, I'm not going to go into it on air because you know just why it's so personal. You kind of know now where I was personally at the time.
Sure.
I was too exhausted to keep going with it. And at the time, I was even hiding from you just kind of what was going on. I feel like we've had enough time away from it now. I don't want to do away with On Trial. I want to keep On Trial going. I
hope so. I started scheduling 2019 already.
Because, of course, you have. But especially now that we have Spreaker, we don't have to do it every 2 weeks like we did before. That was exhausting.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. we got away with that for a little while when Sean was pants on head nanners. The pants have come off my head. I'm wearing the pants now. Lost a lot of weight and they fit again. I think it's time we maybe bring that back on a monthly basis.
All right, so May 20th of 2019, Long Road to Ruin, John Wick 1 and 2. I'm putting it on the calendar.
And I say we make that the official relaunch of the series, in which we because think of how many franchises have kind of kept going since then. How many franchises we never got to touch. Maybe we could even revisit a few of them. I mean, we can kind of make it almost like I don't know, Long Road to Ruin, the remake.
It's something we can batter on. I definitely want to do the John Wicks. It calls to me. It says, no, you need to watch both movies, or you need to review them with Sean, and then go see John Wick 3.
And by the way, if you happen to be listening to this, hey Ben,
yes,
we're not doing this without you.
Yeah, you have a year and 2 months to get a John Wick title card going.
Yeah, there's plenty of stuff that I think we can have fun with. I'm in a better place now. We're no longer quite so burned out. We're having fun doing On Trial.
Yep. And I want to keep doing that. You know, I've got it to 1 or 2 a month. I've got them set to certain franchises that Damn You Hollywood's doing. But I think what this conversation tells me is that we don't have to be locked into doing only one thing. If something comes up and I go, hey, On Trial synergizes with this better than Long Road to Ruin does. Long Road to Ruin synergizes with that more so than blah blah yakety schmackety, then we have the option of flipping them around.
Yeah.
Done.
But yeah, you absolutely nailed it. No, we are never again doing 2 Long Road to Ruins per month.
Yeah.
I'm just not that crazy anymore.
I don't have the time. I work 5 days a week now, and
you have 2 kids.
Yeah, and occasionally I like to hang out with my wife.
Yeah, you have 2 kids. I'm doing a 2-hour Twitch stream on an almost daily basis and contributing to at least 3 different blogs.
All right, so with that said, let's get into plugs. So next week we've got a little Jessica Jones, a little of this, a little of that, a little Batman's Head and a Lance. So we got source material on Monday, Volume 1, Uncaged, Jessica Jones. The winter, what do you call it? Robert Winfrey's Winter of Discontent continues with Damn You Hollywood, A Wrinkle in Time. Metal Hammer of Doom will review Ministry, America Can't. And finally, I will have at least Robert Winfrey, but probably a gang of millions on to talk about Jessica Jones Season 2. The following week, it's all Tomb Raider all the time, kind of, sort of. We've got Tomb Raider Volume 1 on source material, Season of the Witch. We'll be reviewing the new Tomb Raider reboot on Damn You Hollywood. We'll be reviewing the new Judas Priest, Firepower, on the Metal Hammer of the Doom. And then Sean and I are back for our second On Trial of the month. Speaking of franchises, we're not doing the whole thing. We're just doing one of them. We're doing the really silly one. Lara Croft, Tomb Raider 2, Cradle of Life.
Oh boy, the not good Tomb Raider.
If you're looking for more On Trials, we will be doing another one on April 5th. We will be doing Tron. And that is it for the month of April. In May 8th, this is the ever-moving show, by the way. I've moved it like 3 times. We will be doing On Trial Battleship. And then it's the summer of Sean. Sean gets to pick a show for June 5th. He gets to pick... July is filled up right now. He gets to pick August 14th and...
Hang on, I'm actually writing these dates down.
Sorry. Yeah. August 14th and June 5th. He gets to pick those shows. Anything he wants, we're going to do. So let's see if he'll torture me like Robert Winfrey wants to torture me. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
I wouldn't call it torture. I think my idea is I kind of want to take explicitly movies that were major critical darlings,
mm-hmm.
and kind of have fun with really dissecting those.
Sounds just like what I had in mind for the show.
Well, because I mean, look at the debate that comes up every single year around the Oscars, and the same thing that so many people have complained about for years, and it is all these movies sweep up all the same nominations, and with few exceptions, I challenge you to find a dozen people you know who have seen most of them. And that's even despite the fact that we've now expanded the Best Picture category from about five movies once upon a time to now something like 50. I mean, because the Oscars are no longer about the best movies that people actually went to see. And which is amazing considering that the movie industry in film is so rooted in audience support.
Right.
And yet you had people who were, I mean, this year was an exception. Obviously, a lot of people went to, I mean, Get Out was also a huge commercial success, enormous success, as was Dunkirk.
Mm-hmm.
But you also had people going, Logan only got one nomination? Really? Wonder Woman got shut out entirely? Really?
Yeah, well, those were also cases where people, it was like if a comic book movie is in any way artistically done, or competently filmed, people are like, it needs an Oscar. It's like, all right, settle down. I understand you're comparing it to Rise of the Silver Surfer, but settle the fuck down. And Wonder Woman also, had people getting behind it because of gender politics, which is A, an argument I've already gotten into, B, an argument I don't want to get into now, and C, Wonder Woman was fine except for the third act. Let's not get crazy.
Well, and I had my issues with Wonder Woman as well, but the thing is, my feeling is that Hollywood too often will completely shun something from awards consideration and the real prestige tier just because, it's a genre movie. Like somehow that precludes it from actually being good and artistically groundbreaking and worthy and having something actually to say. And what Wonder Woman did well, it did well just like Logan did as well. They both did well as movies that turned a genre on their head and kind of gave us some things that we hadn't seen much of before. The movies I want to tackle for this are ones where they were best picture, they were huge, they were acclaimed at the time, but how do they hold up today?
I'm really curious to see what you'll end up going with.
Okay. Let me throw one of them out here right now then.
Oh, okay.
August 14th, let's do Dances with Wolves.
Cool. I've never actually seen that one, but it's on the list of things I wanted to see.
Okay. Then you said June 5th was my other date.
Yeah, hang on. Let me put that in there. On Trial.
We're seriously doing 2 summer shows?
Dances with Wolves. And I'll figure out who's defending and who's prosecuting later. So yeah, we're doing one in August, is On Trial, and then with Luke Cage launching when it is, and the amount of summer movies I got to do on
fair
Hollywood.
enough.
Yeah.
Then
just lost the date.
June 5th. Then June 5th.
Yes.
I got one for you. I propose we take the on trial formula and skew it just ever so slightly to tackle a historic Best Picture race. Okay?
Okay.
Because one year you had 3 of the greatest movies of all time going up against each other, and some people have wondered whether the right movie really won, looking at how they've held up in hindsight. I propose we pit movie against movie, and since it's the summer of Sean, I get to pick which of the movies I'm going to be defending as my client. You, Mark Radulich, will be defending Best Picture winner and arguably one of Tom Hanks' finest hours, I must admit, Forrest Gump.
I love Forrest Gump.
Okay. And in my case, I will be defending a movie that tugs at my heartstrings every time I see it because it holds a deep personal significance for me.
Showgirls?
It is. It is my favorite movie of all time. The Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, that's a good one. The Shawshank Redemption.
Gump versus Shawshank.
All right, and I am defending Forrest Gump. All right, we got it. The Summer of Sean.
And I will tell you right now, I do not hate Forrest Gump. Just to be clear on that, I love that. It's a great movie. But there's being great, and then there's being named Best Picture against what is rightfully considered, in just about every way, one of the greatest movies ever made.
I like it.
Yep.
All right, what do you got going on in your world, and where can they find you, sir?
Let's see. Remind me again, what did I say we were doing on August 14th? Did I say we were doing on August 14th?
Dances with Wolves.
Yeah, Dances with Wolves. Okay. I forgot to write my own choice down. That one will be fun. I'm definitely not going to be telling my biological dad which movie I'm doing. That's one of his favorites of all time, and personally, I will gladly prosecute that one.
Okay. I'll just put it on there that I'm defending it.
Yeah. That overlong piece of shit.
Oh, terrific.
Anyway, as far as my own plugs. First off, thank you everybody for downloading. We greatly appreciate the support, especially now that we are on this magnificent new platform. I love Spreaker so much. If Spreaker were a grown-up human, I would ask for it to adopt me. Mostly because it rescued us from Blog Talk. But as far as where you can find me the rest of the time, I occasionally write video game reviews over at w2mnet.com. As of this writing, my most recent ones were I reviewed Thomas Brush's indie side-scrolling platformer Pinstripe, and the retro 16-bit shoot-'em-up Mercenary Kings Reloaded, both for the PlayStation 4. I also write about wrestling over at thechairshot.com. In fact, I write a little column called 8-Match Tag. It is a weekly octet of choice cuts from the WWE Network library designed to tantalize well-read wrestling fans and provide a little bit of an education to newbies. Meanwhile, about once, sometimes twice a month, I also provide live recapping and reviews of WWE Network pay-per-views over at fpgnews.com in a little column titled Comer Codex Live. Why? Simple, you schmuck. Branding. Because almost any given night of the week, most of the time, except for up until about March 17th, because I'm going to be on hiatus for a short while, You can find me over at twitch.tv/Comer Codex almost every night of the week from about 6 p.m. Central Time. Right now, I am on a quest to burn through a combination of some current games and a massive, about 60 to 100 game long PS3 and PS4 backlog. If you want to come in, chat, heckle me while I'm playing. Actually, no, don't heckle me because I'll banhammer your ass. But swing by, cheer me on, just chat, bullshit with other people while I'm playing. Do whatever. I love streaming. I love having a big crowd. I love having a conversation to follow along with. Most recently, we are currently playing The Evil Within, except for Saturday night when we divert to a multiplayer stream wherein we play usually a combination of Smite and Paladins with my good friend and yours, Cole Marintet the Film Twit, and whoever else I can pull into a 5-person party that night. Just depends on whoever's available. And for updates on all of the above, follow me on Twitter at Comer Codex, where you can leave your love, hate, and respectful disagreements. So, until court is in session again, I'm Sean, you're not. Never dull your colors for someone else's canvas, and have a great evening.
All right, all rise. This has been on trial on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network on Spreaker. For Sean Comer, I am your mandated reporter and frankly unmodified Mr. Mark Radulich. Till the next time, be well, be safe, and behave.
Starlight Lounge presents An Evening with the Progressive Box.
Oh, what a great audience. Let's dim the lights for this next one. Nope, too much. There it is. Gotta get things just right. Like Progressive's Name Your Price tool. Tell us what you want to pay, and we help you find coverage options that fit your budget. And now, the mood is right. Wait, the lights are back on again. Trudy, can you? And now it's completely dark.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.